Hello, Minnesota historians. Today we're going to be discussing some of the famous landmarks. Tomorrow we'll get and discuss some of the famous people. So today's more landmarks and maybe some events. Tomorrow we'll finish up with some people and other maybe some famous festivals throughout the state. We've already kind of talked about that during the culture. So some words you might hear throughout our state are Hiawatha and Minnehaha. And that goes back to the 1900s, or sorry, the 1800s, when um, you had a famous author that wrote a book and had these two characters of Hiawatha and Minnehaha in the book. And there's a statue of them in Minneapolis at Minnehaha Park. And so you'll see these words like Hiawatha Avenue and all the, throughout the state. And basically, they're kind of made up by Henry Wadsworth Longfellow, who published a book titled The Song of Hiawatha. It was a really long poem. Basically, Longfellow never visited Minnesota, but he'd been reading about it, and he decides he's going to write a book about a Dakota princess and a Iroquois warrior who fall in love. You know, the Iroquois and Dakota probably really never even met each other throughout history, but he writes this book about them, and it becomes very famous. And so we have a lot of places named, with Minnehaha and Hiawatha throughout our state because of this famous book. The world's largest ball of twine. Some of you have seen this thing. It's made in Darwin, Minnesota, by one man standing here, and he basically over the years, twine is like what you might find on like hay bales to kind of keep it together and stuff like that. So it's a little rope, and he just collected it over the years and turned it into one giant ball. Down in Nebraska, they've made a bigger one, but a whole town came together to make it. This thing was made by one guy. So you can go to Darwin. Here's Seth. He sent me this picture a couple years ago. Here he is at the world's largest ball of twine. And there it's in a glass case so it doesn't rot away. There it is. The world's largest ball of twine. We have one state park, or national park, I should say. We have many state parks. One national park. Minnesota's only national park was established up near International Falls in 1975. It's a Voyageurs National Park, and these were the lakes and rivers that the Voyageurs would travel on, if you remember when we learned about those guys. And here's what that national park kind of looks like. Just huge waterways, islands, peninsulas, all sorts of stuff. A lot of camping up there. They just opened up camping here today, I believe, up there in Voyageurs National Park. A lot of people will get a houseboat. Here you can kind of see it up north in this green. Stretches from Rainy Lake all the way down to Crane Lake. Big Vic and Big Louie are two of these giant fiberglass statues you might see. One is in Moose Lake as you drive up towards Duluth. If you're driving north, they'll be on your left-hand side. And then you have Big Vic. Big Louie's in Moose Lake. Big Vic is in Rainier. And the story is tied to Voyageurs National Park. In 1975, when it was created, there were some people that did not like that because they were losing their cabins. They were maybe losing hunting spots because you couldn't hunt there anymore. And there was a resort owner, Vic Davis, I don't know if it was a resort, but he owned an island. And he had this Big Louie character put out there right here. And the federal government had to remove it because you can't have that in a national park. So then what did Vic Davis do? He put another one up. Big Vic right here that sits in Rainier, and the federal government had to remove that as well before they came to an agreement on his land. So there was trouble up there. Oh, maybe Big Vic or Big Louie's in Barnum, not Moose Lake. My bad, Barnum. Messed up. If you go to Monaga, there is a statue of Saint Uru. Now, Saint Uru is not a real saint. He was made up by immigrants in the United States on the Iron Range, probably, is what they think. And the Finnish immigrants wanted a saint to celebrate like the Irish were celebrating St. Patrick's Day. So they came up with a story that St. Uru drove the frogs, and later it was changed to the grasshoppers. He drove them out of Finland and saved their crops. So you can go up and see a St. Uru statue up in Managa. The Minnesota Zoo is a famous site. It was created in 1978 in Apple Valley. It was one of the first zoos in the country to start to organize their animals by the living environments as opposed to by species. And so maybe one of the drawbacks sometimes with the Minnesota Zoo is you can't always see the animals real good if they're kind of hiding, but they live in a nice open area rather than in a cage. Some different exhibits. Our second major zoo in our state is in St. Paul. It's the Como Zoo, located at Como Park. At Como Park, there's some different things to see. There's a conservatory, where you can go see plants and birds and stuff like that. It was created in 1897, so it's older. Maybe one of the drawbacks of it is sometimes the cages are smaller. Makes it easier to see the animals, but they may not be quite as comfortable. There's the Major E. McNeely Conservatory, built in 1915. The northwest angle. This was a mistake on a map. I'll have a video of it for you, but this is the only place in the lower 48 in the continental United States that is north of the 49th parallel. Otherwise, everything is south of the 49th parallel here. So this area belongs to Minnesota, belongs to the United States, but it's way up here next to Canada. So if you want to get from Canada or get from this part of the US to this part, or this part of Minnesota to this part, you have to drive through Canada to get there or take a boat. Who lives up in the northwest angle? Well, there's roughly 119 people that live up there. And this is Jim's Corner. You'll see this on a video that I have where basically before you travel into Canada or back in the US, you need to pick up the phone at Jim's Corner and call. And I'll have a video link for you to watch this. Split Rock Lighthouse, I think we talked a little bit about this when we were talking about the Iron Range, but the lighthouses were important to keep those ships from crashing into the rocks. And the Split Rock Lighthouse is one of the more scenic lighthouses in the United States. It was built in 1910 and used until 1969. Today it's part of the state park system, and you have basically people running it, and lots of visitors go through there every year. This is where the lightkeepers used to live. Now one of these is used by the family. I think we listened to this song, The Wreck of the Edmund Fitzgerald, where you had that ship full of ore trying to make it across Lake Superior going east so they could turn that iron ore into steel, but it sunk. They needed to put another 15 miles behind them, and they could have made Whitefish Bay. There it is. It was the pride of the American side. Here's Isle Royale. It's actually located it belongs to Michigan, but it's very close to the arrowhead up here. And some interesting stuff. This is an area where over the years moose and wolves have made it out to the island when on the years when the ice really freezes. And so there's no people, there's not a lot of other types of animals out there. And basically what you find is this environment that's not affected by humans at all, and you can kind of see how the moose and wolves how their ecosystem works without human interference. Well, the problem is not a lot of wolves have come from the mainland recently, and the wolves are dying off because of inbreeding. And so then the moose population is skyrocketing. So now the idea is, since was only like 2 or 3 wolves left, they were going to put some more wolves out there. Well, now you'd be interfering with, the ecosystem, but the wolves were going to disappear anyway. Frank Lloyd Wright. he was a famous architect. He designed many buildings throughout the country and the world. And so he had this unique ability to fit in a building into the landscape. And Minnesota is home to Frank Lloyd Wright's only gas station that he designed. It's up in Cloquet, Minnesota. You can see it here. It kind of has this overhang. There's like nothing to support it because the weight's all over here. But so that would have been a very unusual design back in the day. And there's like a little shop up here. I'll have a video on this gas station as well for you to look at. There it is. Very iconic service station. We have 11 Native American reservations. We did discuss this a little bit when we talked about the Dakota and Ojibwe, where there's kind of this imaginary line that separates the Dakota communities from the Ojibwe communities, and we talked a little bit about the treaties that started to force the Native Americans onto these reservations. Now, these reservations are like their own state. They have some of their own laws. So if you go to a casino, even though Minnesota says you can't smoke in our state in a public place, a casino is like its own state, and they can make up their own rules. I shouldn't say casino. The reservation is their own state. So the United States is home to 50 sovereign states, like Minnesota, and 562 sovereign Indian nations. So it's almost like we have over 600 states, but some are really small. One of the questions kids usually ask is, why are tribes allowed to operate casinos? And it goes back to the state of California versus the Cabazon Band of Mission Indians, where the Supreme Court ruled in 1988 that sovereign Indian tribes could conduct gambling on tribal lands without interference from the state, as long as gambling was legal in the state where the tribe was located, which Minnesota it is. We play scratch offs, and we have our lottery tickets and stuff like that. So our 11 tribes in the state operate 18 casinos. Glensheen Mansion up in Duluth. We talked a little bit about this with the Congdon family and how they built their money was Iron Range money, and they built this mansion up there. Supposedly it could be haunted. There was a grisly murder there in 1977. The Congdon family did buy a lot of land up there near the North Shore, which was donated and can never be developed. So it's there just to, be very scenic. The Boundary Waters was created up north in 1978. Most of the BWCA is off limits to motorized vehicles of any kind. You can't even bring like a ice auger in there that's motor powered. If you're going to ice fish in some areas. And if you see this area up here, Lac LaCroix, when I was up in International Falls, we would actually snowmobile in there from Crane Lake, and part of it's in the BWCA, and part of it's in Canada. Well, in Canada, you can have the snowmobiles, but if you get too close to the BWCA, you got to just walk in there. You can't take a snowmobile in there. So a lot of people will go up there camping for a few days. You're canoeing, you're not going to hear any motorized noises, so it's very scenic. There used to be a lady that lived up there, Dorothy Moulter. She had first worked on a resort, and then when it became part of the Boundary Waters, she ended up just staying there and living on that resort. She was kind of grandfathered in, and for years and years, visitors would go up there and they would stop there, and she would have homemade root beer for them. You can actually get Dorothy's Isle of Pines root beer, according to them, the recipe. They sell it over at the candy store in Jordan, which is open now. Just got a big lake trout there. Eel Pal Festival on Leech Lake in Walker, Minnesota every year. It was not hosted this year. I think it was either coronavirus or the weather maybe was too warm. But these are the eel pout they go after. The burbot, slimy little things. If you're out on Mille Lacs or something, or Lake of the Woods at night, and all of a sudden the rattle reel's going off, and you start pulling up what you think is a nice big walleye, and it turns out to be one of these slimy things. Here they are curling with them. The U.S. Pond Hockey Championships are an annual pond hockey event in Lake Nokomis in Minneapolis every year. I believe the site may have switched recently, but it was started up there. Gooseberry Falls State Park, we talked a little bit about this when we talked about the CCC and how they built a lot of things, man-made structures there up in the park. Some of you have gone camping up there. It's up on the Arrowhead. This is where we'll pick up tomorrow. We'll talk about Morton Ice. And some famous people.